I always trusted her. We had been together for 6 years. I thought I knew her better than anyone. That evening, I decided to surprise her. I left work early, bought her favorite white lilies, ordered dinner from the restaurant she loved. I wanted to spend a special evening with her. When I walked into the apartment, something felt off. It was too quiet. She usually either watched a show or listened to music. But now, absolute silence. I caught a scent in the air. It wasn't her perfume. She always smelled like a soft, sweet vanilla fragrance. But now, there was a sharp, masculine scent with hints of tobacco. Her phone was lying face down on the table. She had never hidden it from me. But this time, it wasn't just locked, it was turned off. Then I heard it, a quiet laugh from the bedroom. Her voice, and a man's voice. Are you serious? He doesn't suspect a thing? No, he's naive. He won't find out unless I tell him myself. My heart froze. I took a few steps toward the bedroom. Are you sure he won't suspect anything? Trust me. The thought of checking on me would never even cross his mind. I took a deep breath and pressed down on the door handle. The door opened. I saw her. I saw him. My best friend. They were together. In my bed. They hadn't noticed me yet. I stood there, unable to move. She turned her head and met my gaze. Shocked, fear, and anger. Are you recording? I hadn't even realized that I had pulled out my phone and pressed record. I was just capturing the moment. They needed to remember this forever. But this wasn't even the worst part. I stood in front of the bedroom door, and my heart was pounding so hard it felt like they might hear it. My hand hovered over the handle. I felt the cold metal beneath my fingers but couldn't force myself to push it down. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head. Maybe I misheard? Maybe it was just my imagination? Maybe when I open this door, I'll realize it was all innocent. But deep inside, I already knew the truth. I inhaled, gathering the last shreds of courage, and pressed the handle. The door slowly swung open, and the scene before me was one I would never forget. Her, him, together, in my bed, her bare skin, the blanket lazily draped over her, as if they had just shifted positions after an intense moment. His hand rested on her waist. Her hair was messy, tousled like it had been after a night of passion. They were wrapped up in their own world, completely unaware that I was standing there. It felt like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe my own eyes. It was my best friend, the person I trusted more than a brother, the person I had grown up with, share my life with, my struggles, my triumphs. And now here he was, with her. I felt my legs go weak, the world spinning around me. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't. The air was thick, suffocating. One question echoed in my mind. How long has this been going on? I stood there paralyzed. My fingers curled into fists. But I didn't scream. I didn't charge forward. I just watched. I watched the way they whispered to each other. The way she laughed at his jokes the same way she used to laugh at mine. The way he touched her hand, so effortlessly, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Just a moment ago, I thought I had a family, a future, people I could trust. And now, everything had shattered into pieces. I could have closed the door and walked away. I could have pretended like nothing had happened. But I did something else. I took a step forward. The floor creaked beneath my weight. And then they saw me. I watched as her expression changed. Relaxed pleasure turned into sheer horror. He flinched, instantly pulling away. The room was drowned in a suffocating silence. Neither of them spoke a word. It was as if someone had hit the pause button on this shameful, disgusting scene. Her lips barely moved. It's not what you think. I smiled, not because I found it funny, but because it was the most pathetic, desperate lie I had ever heard. I shifted my gaze to my friend. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't even try to defend himself. He knew that no words could fix this. I slowly pulled my phone out of my pocket. She narrowed her eyes, and the moment I pressed record, her voice changed. "You're recording? What the hell is wrong with you?" I simply nodded. "I want you both to remember this moment, because I know I will." They were completely absorbed in their own world, completely unaware that I was standing in the doorway. It felt like a punch to the chest. I couldn't believe my own eyes. It was my best friend, the person I trusted more than a brother, the person I had grown up with, who had been there through every high and low. We shared secrets, supported each other, and now he was here, with her. I felt my legs go weak, the world around me spinning. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't. The air in the room grew heavier, suffocating. One single question echoed in my mind. How long has this been going on? I stood there frozen, my fingers curled into fists. But I didn't scream. I didn't charge at them. I just watched. Watched as they whispered to each other. Watched as she laughed at his jokes the same way she used to laugh at mine. Watched as he touched her hand, so effortlessly, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Just moments ago, I was certain I had a family, a future, people I could trust. And now, it had all shattered like broken glass. I could have just closed the door and walked away. I could have pretended like nothing had happened. But I did something else. I took a step forward. The floor creaked under my weight. And that's when they saw me. I watched as her expression shifted. Relaxed pleasure twisted into sheer horror. He flinched, instantly pulling away from her. The room was consumed by absolute silence. Neither of them said a word. It was as if someone had pressed pause on this shameful, disgusting scene. Her lips barely moved. It's not what you think. I smiled, not because I found it funny, but because it was the most pathetic, desperate excuse I had ever heard. I shifted my gaze to my so-called friend. His face had turned pale, his lips pressed into a tight line. He didn't even try to speak. He knew that no words could fix this. Slowly, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. She narrowed her eyes, and when I pressed record, her voice changed. "You're recording?" I simply nodded. "I want you both to remember this moment, because I know I will." I stood in the doorway, and they still hadn't noticed me. The room was dimly lit, the warm glow of a bedside lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. The walls. I saw every detail. The white sheets wrinkled, as if they had just shifted after long minutes of passionate entanglement. Her long hair was sprawled across the pillow. He lay beside her, one hand barely touching her thigh, his fingers gliding over her skin as if he had done it countless times before. Her lips were slightly parted, a lazy, satisfied smile playing at the corners. He whispered something into her ear. She responded with a soft laugh, the same laugh I had heard just minutes ago from behind the door. That sound now made my stomach turn. I could have screamed. I could have lunged forward and smashed his face in. I could have grabbed her, demanded an explanation, begged her to tell me this wasn't what it looked like. But I did none of those things. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, unlocked it, opened the camera, pressed record. I wasn't even fully aware of what I was doing until I saw their intimate betrayal captured on the screen. My fingers felt ice cold. My heart beat in a steady, measured rhythm, as if I had no emotions left. I just stood there, filming. They still hadn't noticed me. His hand moved along her body, and she closed her eyes, soaking in the moment. And then, suddenly, as if sensing something with a sixth sense, he opened his eyes. I didn't look away. He froze. His hand stopped mid-motion. I saw the fear start to bloom in his eyes. His mouth opened slightly, as if to speak, but no words came out. She noticed the change in him and lifted her head. Her eyes met mine, and in an instant, the room was consumed by a suffocating, deathly silence. When a person realizes they've been caught, their first reaction is denial, then shock, and finally, fear. I saw it all play out in her expression. First, disbelief. Her pupils dilated. She sucked in a sharp breath. He snatched his hand away, jolting upright. His face turned as pale as a ghost. She frantically pulled the blanket up to cover herself, as if that could somehow erase what I had already seen. I didn't move. I just stood there holding the phone, still recording. My eyes remained cold. Not a single word was spoken. The silence thickened, suffocating, unbearable. She finally swallowed, trying to push down the lump in her throat. Her lips moved, but her voice was weak, foreign. "What are you doing here?" I raised an eyebrow, feigning curiosity. My voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Me?" I paused for effect. "What are you doing?" She blinked rapidly, scrambling for words. His breathing was heavy. He could barely lift his head. I didn't stop recording. I didn't let them escape this moment. I wanted them to feel every single second of it, so they would remember this day, just as I did. Because this was the day when everything changed. And this wasn't even the worst part. She stared at me, her eyes brimming with tears, but they weren't tears of guilt. They weren't tears of shame. They were tears of anger. Deep, burning, uncontrollable rage, as if I was the one who had done something wrong. She clenched the blanket in her fists, her shoulders trembling. And then she exploded. "You're recording? Are you serious?" Her voice sliced through the air like a blade, sharp and filled with fury. But I remained calm. She gripped the blanket tighter, pulling it up to her chin, as if she could somehow cover up what had already been exposed. As if wrapping herself in fabric could erase the truth I had just witnessed. I glanced at the phone in my hand, then looked back at her. "Yes, seriously," I said in a cold, flat tone. "I need a way to remember this, don't I?" She exhaled sharply, her lips twitching, her eyes igniting with even more rage. "You're insane. Delete that." Her voice cracked into a scream. She wasn't upset. She wasn't ashamed. She wasn't broken from remorse. She was furious. At me. I watched her chest rise and fall rapidly. Saw her hands clench the blanket so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her anger was raw, wild, almost animalistic. She wasn't panicking because she had been caught. She was panicking because I had proof. She turned to look at my so-called friend, the man who had been touching her just minutes ago, the man she had let into my bed. He remained silent. He didn't even try to explain himself. His shoulders were tense, his fists clenched, his eyes glued to the floor. He was afraid to look at me, afraid to say a single word, and his silence spoke louder than any excuse ever could. He knew there was nothing left to say. I shifted my gaze back to her. She gritted her teeth. "I'm serious. Turn the camera off." Her voice wavered, the edge of panic creeping in. I tilted my head slightly. "And what if I don't?" Her breath hitched. "If you don't turn it off right now, I'll—" "You what?" Her lips trembled. She knew. She knew there was nothing she could do. She couldn't make me forget what I had seen. She couldn't make me forgive her. And she certainly couldn't make me delete this video. Because I already knew what I was going to do next. And then I did something they never expected. I stood in front of them, holding my phone in my hand. Her shouting still rang in my ears, but I didn't care. I no longer felt pain or anger. Only cold, merciless calm. She was furious. Her eyes burned with hatred. Her body trembled with tension. She darted her gaze between me and the phone, realizing that I wasn't going to back down. "Turn it off." She lunged forward, but I quickly took a step back. "One more move, and I'll send it right now," I said, my voice steady, cold, devoid of emotion. She froze. My so-called friend still sat there, paralyzed. He didn't even try to stop me. He knew it was too late. I lowered my gaze to the screen. The video was still recording. I pressed stop. Now it was time for the real game to begin. I opened my contacts, scrolled through the list, and tapped on one name. Her mother. The woman who always told me what a perfect boyfriend I was for her daughter. The woman who always looked at me with warmth and pride. The woman who, just yesterday, told me, "If every man were like you, this world would be a much better place. And now, she was about to see who her daughter really was. I pressed send. She saw the message almost instantly. 3 dots appeared on the screen. She was typing. I felt everything inside me go still. Her daughter saw it too. She gasped, as if someone had just doused her with ice water. You didn't, you wouldn't, she whispered. My phone buzzed in my hand. One message. Come home. Now. Her face turned white as a sheet. She looked like she had just been punched in the stomach. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She whipped around to look at my so-called best friend, as if searching for support, but he only shook his head, staring at the floor. She grabbed her phone and frantically started typing, her fingers trembling. I knew she was trying to explain herself, but it was useless. I was no longer the man she could manipulate, and this wasn't even the worst part. I stood before them, feeling the tension in the room grow heavier, like the air before a storm. She was still clutching her phone, her fingers trembling. The blanket had slipped down, but she didn't even try to cover herself. There was no fear in her eyes anymore, only rage. And him? He sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, silent, like a ghost. I took a slow breath, forcing the fire inside me to stay contained. How long has this been going on? My voice was steady, but I was burning inside. I stared directly at him. He didn't look up. She remained silent too. The silence was maddening. They weren't even trying to lie. I took another step forward, my shadow stretching over the bed, swallowing them both. I'll ask again. How long has this been going on? And then she laughed. It wasn't nervous laughter. It wasn't an apology. It was the laughter of someone who had been caught and no longer cared. She ran a hand through her hair, tossing it back, and then looked at me with pure contempt. If you really want the truth, you were the last to know. Her voice was calm, almost amused. I blinked. I didn't understand what she meant at first. She caught my stare and shrugged. Ask him. My gaze snapped back to my friend. His breathing was shallow, his fingers laced together so tightly they turned white. He didn't lift his eyes. Sweat beaded on his forehead. I took another step forward. Look at me. He didn't move. My fists clenched. Look at me. His shoulders jerked, but he still refused to meet my gaze. Something inside me broke. Something heavy dropped into my stomach, and I felt the last shreds of my world collapsing. I already knew. I hadn't heard the words yet, but I already knew. And this was even worse than the betrayal itself. I stared at him, my heartbeat pounding in my chest like a trapped animal. The question hung in the air, suffocating. I waited for an answer, but he hesitated. I watched his chest rise and fall rapidly, his hands tightening into fists, his pupils darting around as if looking for an escape. Speak. My voice was low, threatening. He swallowed hard. Finally, he lifted his head and met my gaze. His lips parted, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. She sat beside him, and I saw the corner of her mouth twitch in something that wasn't quite a smile, but also wasn't fear. He began, his voice trembling. I slept with your sister, too. The room spun around me. A cold sweat broke out across my back. I didn't believe my ears. What? My hands clenched into fists, and for a split second, I lost control over my own body. He flinched as if expecting me to hit him. I wanted to. I really wanted to. But instead, I stood there, feeling the scorching heat of pure, unfiltered rage flood my veins. It happened last summer, he said quietly, as if trying to soften the blow. She never told you? My breathing grew heavy. Last summer? I remembered how my sister had been acting strange, how she had avoided meeting my eyes, how she would change the subject quickly whenever his name came up. I remembered her nervous smiles. And now I knew why. They both betrayed me. Not just her. Not just him. My own blood. A wave of nausea rolled through me, making my body physically sick. I couldn't look at him any longer. Slowly, I slid my phone into my pocket. I could feel her eyes on me. I could hear the ragged sound of his breath, uneven, shallow. I could have screamed. I could have smashed his face against the wall. I could have grabbed her, made her understand the depth of her betrayal. But all I did was turn around and walk away. I didn't want to hear another word. But they had no idea about the worst part. I walked down the hallway, every step pounding in my temples like a hammer against steel. My mind swirled with memories, fragments of conversations, strange moments that had once seemed insignificant but now fit together like a puzzle, a perfect image of betrayal. My heart wasn't beating. It was pounding. I took a slow breath. They thought I was destroyed, that I would just leave them in that bed, broken, devastated. They thought I had just learned the truth. But they didn't know the most important thing. I had known all along. I wasn't an idiot. I had noticed the signs long ago. Too many girls' nights out. Too many locked phone screens. Too many late shifts. Too many sudden showers before bed, when she never cared before. I noticed how he acted differently around me. How he looked me in the eye less. How his once carefree tone had turned tense. Whenever they were in the same room, I could feel something between them. A charge in the air. A silent understanding. At first, I thought it was my imagination. I convinced myself it meant nothing. But then I knew. I started noticing the little things. How she would get messages and immediately flip her phone face down. How she would say his name too often in conversation, as if her subconscious was trying to expose her. How she would quickly change the subject if I walked in while she was on a call. But the real proof came one night, when her phone rang in the middle of the night. She was already asleep. I reached for it, and saw his name on the screen. I picked up. I didn't say a word. Neither did he. Just silence. He thought it was her. And in that moment I knew. This wasn't paranoia. This was the truth. And that's when I started planning. I wasn't going to confront her without proof. I needed control. So a week ago, I installed a hidden camera in our bedroom. I bought a small, high-resolution camera. I hid it inside the bookshelf, where she would never notice it. I set it up with motion sensors so it would only record activity in the room. I stayed up all night, reviewing the footage from the first few days. At first, nothing. An empty bed. Silence. But on the third day, while I was at work, I saw them. At first, they were careful, whispering, quick, nervous glances at the door. But then, when they realized I wasn't coming home, everything changed. I watched as she kissed him the way she used to kiss me. I watched as she laughed in his arms. I watched as they did it in my bed. I watched every second, every movement, every betrayal. I didn't just learn the truth. I recorded it. I had an entire folder of evidence. Every kiss, every touch, every night I thought she was home alone. I made backups. She could destroy my phone, but she couldn't destroy the truth. So when I stood in that room, I wasn't just a victim. I was the one in control. And now it was time for the final move. The next morning, I woke up before the sun rose. I hadn't slept at all. My mind was replaying everything. Every word, every glance, every sound from the night before. I thought I would feel pain, regret, but I didn't. Instead, I felt absolute clarity. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a game played behind my back. Months of lies. And now, I decided this would no longer be my secret. Everyone had to know. I grabbed my phone and opened the folder of videos. I made sure everything was saved in multiple places. And then I took action. First, I opened our family group chat. Her parents were there. Her mother, the woman who always said, "You are the best thing that ever happened to my daughter." Her father, the man who shook my hand and told me, "You are an honest and respectable man." I pressed send. Uploading files. I waited. A few seconds passed. 3 dots appeared on the screen. They were reading. And then, What is this? This can't be real. Come home. Now. The next step. The group chat. It was filled with our mutual friends, her girlfriends, his buddies. People who had always seen us as the perfect couple. They had been just as blind as I was. I typed a short message. This is who you all thought were my friends. This is who I thought was my family. Then I attached a video. It sent in an instant. At first, silence. And then, the messages started flooding in. Is this a joke? How could she do this? This can't be real. Bro, I don't even know what to say. People I had never even spoken to started messaging me. Some of them were his friends. Some sent me words of support. Some refused to believe what they had seen. But none of that mattered, because the most important thing was her reaction. I watched as she erased herself from social media in real time. First, her Instagram went private. Then, her Facebook vanished. And then, she wiped out every account she had. She ran. She deleted herself from the internet, as if that could erase the reality of what had happened. She left the apartment. She packed her things in the middle of the night and fled to her mother's house. But that wasn't the most important thing, because this wasn't over. The next morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating. The sun hadn't even risen yet. Outside, the world was still dark, and the silence in my apartment felt eerie, almost unnatural. I reached for the nightstand, grabbed my phone, and looked at the screen. One new message. From an unknown number. I frowned. Who could this be? I opened the message. You don't know the whole truth yet. Tomorrow, you'll get a surprise. My heart skipped a beat. Then it stopped. I read the words again. What did this mean? A chill ran down my spine. I sat up, gripping my phone tightly. It wasn't from her. She was too afraid to even look in my direction after what had happened. She had deleted her accounts, cut off all contact, and disappeared to her mother's house. It wasn't from him either. He had stayed silent. No attempts to explain himself. No messages. No calls. Then who? Who else was involved in this? What else didn't I know? I felt the tension rise in my chest. I thought back to her words that night. If you want the truth, you were the last to know. That meant there was more. Something even bigger. Something that had been kept from me by everyone. Something that could change everything. I looked at the message again. Tomorrow. What happens tomorrow? What kind of surprise was waiting for me? I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. I wanted to reply. I wanted to type, "Who are you?" But something stopped me. A nameless number. No signature. No identity. I had no idea who this was. But one thing was certain. This story wasn't over yet.